Hello, everybody. I'm Amelia,
I'm Tom.
and we're bringing another story from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6. This is the story that follows immediately after the story of the beheading of John the Baptist, which follows the story of Jesus sending his disciples out in twos to call people to repent, proclaim the kingdom, heal, and cast out demons. Okay, so take it away, Tom.
So the disciples gathered around Jesus, and they told him all the things that they had done and taught. And he said to them, let's go away to a lonely place, a desert place, by ourselves and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So they got into the boat and went to a desert place all by themselves. But many recognized them in the boat, and they followed them, and they rushed around throughout that whole region, and they ran. This is like a bunch of kids. They ran and got there before Jesus and the disciples. So when Jesus came on shore, he looked and he saw, this great crowd. And he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Well, when they had crossed over, after the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the water, they made land at the plain of Gennesaret, and they moored the boat. And when they got out of the boat, people immediately recognized him, and they rushed around the whole region and began to bring their sick on mats and to lay them in the marketplaces. Wherever they heard that he was going, and wherever he went, they laid their sick in the marketplaces, whether in villages or cities or in farms. And they begged him that they might even just touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched the fringe of his garment, they were healed.
Okay, so there's our story, which has a gap in it. You referenced after, you did the part about Jesus taking his disciples off on retreat and then seeing this huge crowd that gathered, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then suddenly you said, after the feeding the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the sea, then this happened. So you want to explain a little bit why we missed these two very important stories?
Well, in the finite wisdom of the designers of the lectionary, they made this decision to leave. It's like a sandwich that has only the bread on each side, but nothing in the middle. So this begins with one side of an earlier sandwich, Jesus sending out the 12. Then there's the story of John the Baptist, and then of their coming back. And John the Baptist is in the background. His death.
Okay, hold on now. You haven't explained why we're skipping those two stories.
Well, I'm getting there.
Okay.
So Jesus is clearly then what? Depressed? and wants to go on a retreat with the disciples. But
Well, maybe he's just
what
sad.
happens is when the disciples come back, Jesus feeds 5,000 people, and then he walks on the water, and that's when they come to the shore and land at Gennesaret. And there is this splurge, this explosion of healings and of people chasing him around to find out where he was going.
Okay, I'm still waiting to hear why the lectionary skipped over those two stories.
I think probably the reason is that they had in mind that the month of August is going to be the story in John 6 of his feeding the 5,000, and then the whole discourse of the bread of life that follows that. And that's going to be the subject of the lectionary for the next, I think, 4 weeks. So I expect that that's the reason that they didn't include the healing of the feeding.
Okay, so they chose, they're going to do John's version instead of Mark's.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. It sounded like when you were explaining things that Jesus was traveling on the sea quite a lot, going back and forth.
Yeah.
Is there some significance you'd like to explain to us about that?
Well, several of Jesus, journeys across the sea are across to the east side of the Sea of Galilee in the Gentile communities. This journey, if this is the Sea of Galilee, then the plain of Gennesaret and Capernaum and the place and where this desert place was that they were going to was up in the western part of the Sea of Galilee. On the east side was Gentile territory. This is clearly, and the audience would have known this was Jewish territory. And so this is Jesus' ministry to the people of Israel. And so this is, and the geographical location makes that clear.
Okay. Now you mentioned, well, I called it a retreat, I guess. Jesus asked his disciples, let's go away to a lonely place, to a deserted place. And then the reason, well, actually, the reason's given in the story because many were coming and going and they didn't even have leisure to eat. But I think it's also, you said it was on the heels of John the Baptist being executed and also of the disciples having gone out and done all this stuff. So it's both that they've been very busy, they need to get away, but they've also lost this very important person in a very cruel way, and maybe need to process that a little bit, I gather.
I think so. I mean, that John was the person to whom Jesus was probably the closest. And John the Baptist was, by implication, was Jesus' mentor. And so Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. And so this crucial step in his ministry, and to a significant degree, there was coherence between John the Baptist's teaching about the kingdom of God and Jesus' teaching. And so in this bizarre execution, Jesus lost his closest teacher. And so the implication, I think, in the story is that Jesus is sad and wants to reflect with his disciples on this loss and also on what it might mean for him, given that what happened to John the Baptist for what he was doing and the degree of continuity between John the Baptist and Jesus, it was not out of the question to think there might be some tough times ahead for Jesus.
Right. Of course, they never really get to do any of that because of this all the people that are just drawn to Jesus, both because of his teaching, but I think more so because of but his healing. And
Right.
that really gets emphasized. Maybe one of the good things about looking at these stories without the feeding the 5,000 and
this new edition.
What?
This is a new edition that the lectionary
Right.
creators have.
Okay. But what I was going to say was, because those big important stories aren't included here, we pay a little more attention to what happened afterwards.
Right.
That I frankly had never paid that much attention to, but that, Jesus was then on in Gennesaret. I get confused about where he was because he's moving around so much. But they bring all of these people to him, just everybody who's sick, and he heals them all. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And then you get this little detail about how they wanted to touch the fringe of his cloak. So what is there some special meaning about what was the fringe exactly, and why just touching the fringe of his cloak happened to be mentioned by Mark?
Right. It's Numbers 15, 38 and 39. There it is.
Okay, hold it up so we can see your face, Tom.
Okay.
You're buried in your book.
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them to make fringes on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord in the fringe on each corner." You have the fringe so that when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and do not follow the lust of your own heart and your own eyes. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and you shall be holy to your God. And there's a reiteration of that in Deuteronomy, that there's a simple commandment: you shall not wear clothes made of wool and linen woven together. You shall make tassels on the four corners of the cloak with which you cover yourself. So this was the getting fringes or tassels on the four corners of the garment was a basic expectation of the clothing that Jewish men would wear. It was both a sign of their identity, but it was also, as is stated in Numbers, it was a memory hook. And so whenever you looked at the fringe of the garment, then you were to remember the law, to remember God's covenant, and to do it. Mm-hmm. So this is a sign of Jesus' Jewish identity and of his then camaraderie with all the people of Israel, and his healing them then in this magnificent explosion of enthusiasm about Jesus and his ministry.
Yeah, right. So what are we to make of all these healing stories? I mean, you've talked before about the significance of Jesus' healing ministries and how that has really motivated people throughout these 2,000 years to care for those who are sick and injured,
right?
Establish hospitals, all that kind of thing. Anything more to add to that from this?
Well, this story is the most explicit about these many healings that Jesus did, and people bringing people who were sick from all over. There's the story of the healing of the paralytic, or the four friends bringing the paralytic to Jesus, but there isn't anything like this, from all over the whole region, that they were bringing people on mats, so that to wherever he was, that they'd bring the sick from towns and cities and farms and lay them in the marketplace so that they might touch even the fringe of his garment and be healed. So this is, it is in the story a remarkable thing. for us as, I don't know, modern observers, it tests, it goes beyond what is, I don't know, believable. And so clearly in the ancient world, there was a belief in the possibility of magical power things related to garments, and of the spirit of God being able to do things, through these miraculous things. This is a sign that this is an act of God, that Jesus is carrying out God's spirit. And what's at the core of this is that God is involved in all of these healings, and that is the source of this spirit, of this inspiration for healing ministries that has been part of the history of the church for 2,000 years.
What are the implications of these kind of the before and the after stories for ministries of peace and justice today?
Well, I think this is a clear mandate for universal health care for everybody, that Jesus does not in any way discriminate, that people bring to him those who are sick, and that he heals everybody. There is no discrimination in relation to those who are wealthy, those who are, part of systems. Everybody is eligible for Jesus' healing. And that is clearly the expectation and the spirit of this throughout Christian history, is that people who had no place to go were welcomed into the monasteries and hospitals, places where they were cared for. And this became so popular that it's become a structural part of our society. It was not in Jesus' day. And so this whole institution of institutions, massive medical care for people, was an idea that was inspired and energized by these stories of Jesus' healing ministry. So it has had tremendous impact on the history of the world. And that's what is at the core of, I don't know, the belief that is implicit in this, is that there is in Jesus' ministry, in his spirit, the possibility of healing and of that being extended to everybody. So this notion that healing, healthcare should only be limited to the rich, to those who can afford it, that's not the spirit.
Right. So that addresses the part of the story that happens after the feeding of the 5,000, but then the before, where the section where Jesus calls his disciples to go off on to a quiet place, and then finds this huge crowd and has compassion on them and teaches them. I was thinking that relates to contemporary ministries of peace and justice in a couple of ways. One is that you do need to take time to reflect on what's happening, to pull back a little bit, to have a retreat, to regather with those with your associates who are working with you. You have to take a break from the work of peace and justice. At least that's what Jesus was attempting to do. But then also the way he looked at this big crowd, and what he felt for them was compassion, because they did seem like they didn't know what they were doing. Sometimes when I think about the society and the ways in which it needs to change, I don't really feel compassion for people. I feel angry a lot of the time at things that are happening, that things don't change. And it didn't seem that that's quite the spirit that Jesus had. He really had compassion. He saw that people just really needed to be taught, needed guidance, and he felt compassion for them. So anyway, those are some ways in which I thought the first part of the story connected with ministries of peace and
Yeah.
justice today.
Yep. Well, and one of the things that strikes me is that that is a mandate for the church now. So as the churches are seeking for what do we do in a post-literary culture, well, one of the things that we can do that every local church can be involved in is ministries and care for the sick and for people who are shut out in various ways from the kind of care that they need. And there are things that local churches can do about that wherever they are located.
Right.
Cities, in villages, towns, on the farms, everywhere.
Yeah, that was kind of good geographic inclusiveness in the story.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Hadn't thought about that either. Okay, well, everybody have a great week. Thanks for joining us as we spend some time with this stories from Mark 6.
Yep. Have a great week. Remember the story. Tell it.